I grew up in a small town a few miles from the Montana-Idaho border. I was on the Montana side. Nothing much ever happens out here, and honestly, that's part of why I never left. This happened a really long time ago, before the whole world had a cell phone and was chronically online. To be honest, my area hasn't changed much at all since then, which is part of the reason why what I'm about to tell you is so fresh in my memory. It was the very end of August, one of those final days of summer when you can already feel the seasons turning. That morning, I was driving my usual route to work, just a 2-lane stretch of highway that cuts through farmland and low hills. Around 15 minutes out, I spotted a car pulled off on the shoulder. It was a light blue, older model sedan, and it looked like it had been there for a while. It was just sitting there on the shoulder. No hazards on, no one standing outside, just sitting there, angled slightly toward the ditch. Now listen, I'm no fool, but I am the type of guy to help a person in need. It's just how I was raised. As I got closer, I slowed down a bit to get a better look. The car wasn't running, and I couldn't see anyone inside. No one in the driver's seat, passenger seat, or the back. It was definitely strange, especially that early in the morning, but it wasn't exactly alarming. People break down and walk off for help all the time out here. I figured maybe someone had car trouble and headed off to the nearest farmhouse, so I kept driving. I had to get to work, and it didn't seem like an emergency. In all honesty, I kind of forgot about the whole thing by the time I got off. But as I was driving home, I saw that exact same car again, in the exact same spot. The only difference was that this time, the driver's side door was wide open. It hadn't been like that in the morning, I was sure of it. I slowed down again, craning my neck a little as I passed, but there was still no sign of anyone. No one walking nearby, no tracks I could see, just that same old car, sitting there with the door hanging open like someone got out in a hurry and never came back. That time, I didn't shrug it off. I pulled over once I had signal again and called the non-emergency line. I told the operator where and what I had seen, and she thanked me before saying someone would check it out. When I was driving into work the next day, the car was finally gone, so I figured that would be the end of it. About a week later though, while I was eating breakfast, I saw something on the local news that caught my attention. Reportedly, the police were investigating a missing person case, something about a vehicle found abandoned along a rural stretch of highway just outside town. The things they were saying lined up exactly with what I had seen. I instantly connected the dots and turned up the volume on my TV. They didn't release the guy's name, but they said the car was registered to a man from out of town who never showed up to where he was supposed to. The thing was, according to the authorities, there was no sign of foul play and there were no witnesses to the situation. I've always been slightly suspicious of the media, so I wasn't sure I believed the story the news people were giving. Either way, it was eerie that I had basically been wise to the situation right when it happened. Come to think of it, I might have been the first person, or even the only person to have reported that car on the side of the road at all. It was definitely a weird feeling. I tried to move on with my life, but I just couldn't. The curiosity was getting the better of me. Like I said before, not much happens out here, so something as odd as this was far too peculiar for me to just ignore. The next morning, I called my brother up. I'll just call him Benjamin. He's a local firefighter, not in my exact town, but close enough that we usually hear about the same stuff. That's just kind of how things are around my neck of the woods. I wanted to ask him if he had any information from the police department, because I knew for a fact they often communicate with each other. He told me that they had gotten some memo about it from the sheriff's office, something about a vehicle found abandoned and obviously the missing person. I asked him if the police were planning to do anything about it. He said he didn't know for sure, but that they'd probably organize a search at some point. He didn't have many details beyond that. I told him we should help out and maybe see if a few of the guys from the station would be willing to join in too. At first, he was confused as to why I was so invested in the whole thing, but I eventually convinced him. And by the way, I'm not really sure why I was so adamant about it either. I guess I just felt like I had some personal connection to it. I didn't even know how we'd coordinate with the police and organize the search, so I let my brother handle all of that himself. Within a couple days, and with permission of course, he pulled something together. The police were already planning on doing a search, and they appreciated the added help. It wasn't anything too grand, just a few officers, some off-duty firefighters, and me. The search was centered around a shallow wooded patch and a couple of old irrigation ditches that ran just off the shoulder of the highway. It was the kind of terrain that wouldn't look like much from a passing car, but once you were on foot, it was clear how easy it'd be for someone to get turned around or slip out of sight. We split off into pairs to be as efficient as possible. I, of course, paired up with my brother. About an hour into the search, one of the pairs radioed in. They spotted something through a break in the brush. We all converged on their location as quickly as possible. It turned out to be an old maintenance shack, and from the looks of it, one that probably hadn't been used in years. The whole thing was half sunken into the ground, with overgrowth curling up the sides. From the road, you'd never even know it was there. The door was hanging slightly open, and I could see that the lock had been snapped off. Inside, it was dark and musty, the way you'd expect an uninhabited space to feel. But as my eyes adjusted, I started noticing signs that someone had been in there recently. There were empty water bottles and food wrappers all over the place in a way that seemed deliberate. The search team spread out to check for additional evidence, both inside and around the perimeter of the shack. One of the firefighters said he spotted something by the back wall, so the rest of us went over to check it out. There was a small, clean hole in one of the wooden boards, just above floor level. The hole had sharp, splintered edges that looked nothing like the kind of damage you'd expect from weather or rot. It looked exactly like a bullet hole. We searched thoroughly, both inside the shack and around it, looking for a shell casing, a slug, or any signs of blood, but there was nothing. Just that single, unexplained hole in the wall that did make sense given the complete lack of other evidence. The officers radioed in the discovery to dispatch, and I could tell from their tone that this had moved beyond a simple missing person case. The lead officer gathered all of us together and said they'd take it from there. Then he specifically asked me to leave, since I was the only civilian there. I felt dismissed and frustrated, but I didn't have much choice except to comply, so I left. When I called Benjamin later that evening, he gave me vague responses about what had happened after I left. Eventually, he admitted that the firefighters had also been asked to leave shortly after I departed. The police had basically cleared everyone out and took over the scene entirely. Over the following weeks, I waited for updates. Benjamin's contacts at the department claimed they didn't know any details about the case, which I found strange. The local news never followed up beyond the original missing person report. It was like the whole thing had just been quietly dropped. Eventually, I decided to drive back and find the shack on my own. I was certain I remembered exactly where it was, so one day, I drove along the highway until I found the spot where we had begun the search. I spent hours walking the area where I was absolutely certain the shack should be. I followed the irrigation ditches to a T. Everything from the terrain to the sky looked exactly the same as it had that day, but there was nothing. No shack in sight. I started questioning my own memory. I figured there was a slight chance that maybe I wasn't looking in the exact right place, but even if that were the case, the shack should have been somewhere in that immediate range. I tried a different section of the search area, then another, but still found nothing. It was so strange. Stranger than I'm describing it now. I remember standing there in that overgrown scrubland, completely alone with the exception of the gentle breeze that whisked past me every so often. Peaceful, yeah, but strange. The only other explanation I could come up with was that maybe the county had removed the shack entirely. It wouldn't have been too difficult to excavate the thing and haul it away, but that seemed like an extreme response to what was supposed to be a routine missing person case. Those were the only two options, though. Either my memory had misled me, or the shack was no longer there. I left shortly after that. There wasn't much else I could do, really. I was left with this uncomfortable feeling that something important happened during those final